The wind howled across the dusty plains of the Wild West, carrying with it the lonely cries of a woman who believed her life had already ended. Clara Whitmore sat on the wooden steps of the small, abandoned train station, her thin dress covered in dust, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Just 2 days earlier, she had arrived in the harsh frontier town of Red Creek as a hopeful mail-order bride, believing she was traveling toward a new life, a new beginning, and perhaps even love. Instead, the man who had written her letters, the man who had promised her a home and a future, had taken one look at her when she stepped off the train and coldly turned his back. "You're not what I expected," he had said without a second glance. And just like that, Clara's hope had been thrown into the dirt. She had no money left, no family nearby, and no place to go. The man who had brought her across the country had vanished, leaving her stranded in a town where strangers looked at her with suspicion and pity. The hotel owner refused to let her stay without payment, the townspeople whispered behind her back. And when the sun began to sink behind the mountains, Clara realized something terrifying. She was completely alone. The night grew colder, and the wind bit through her clothes like icy knives. Clara wrapped her arms around herself and stared down the empty road, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. She had spent weeks traveling across the country, clutching the letters from a man she believed would care for her. Each letter had spoken of kindness, of partnership, of a peaceful ranch and a warm home. But now the letters felt like lies. A group of rough men passed by on horseback, laughing loudly as they noticed her sitting alone. One of them slowed his horse and smirked. "Well now, looks like the bride got herself abandoned." The others laughed. Clara lowered her eyes, hoping they would ride on and leave her alone. Thankfully they did, but the humiliation burned inside her chest like fire. Hours passed. Darkness settled over the town. Just when Clara thought she might freeze on those wooden steps, the distant sound of hooves echoed along the road. A tall cowboy rode slowly toward the station, his lantern swinging from the saddle. His hat was pulled low, and the long shadow of his horse stretched across the ground. He had been riding back from a long cattle run and hadn't expected to see anyone out this late. But then he saw her, a woman sitting alone in the cold. The cowboy stopped his horse and looked at her carefully. Her shoulders were shaking, and even in the dim lantern light, he could see the exhaustion written across her face. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you all right out here?" Clara looked up slowly, her eyes filled with quiet despair. "No," she whispered honestly. The cowboy climbed down from his horse and walked a few steps closer, keeping a respectful distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "My name's Daniel Carter," he said. "And no, one should be sitting alone out here tonight." Clara hesitated before answering. She had already trusted one stranger, and it had ruined her life. But something in Daniel's voice felt different, calm, honest. "My name is Clara," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "What happened?" The words poured out before she could stop them. She told him about the letters, the journey, the man who rejected her, the money she no longer had, and the fear that had followed her since the train left. When she finished, the silence between them felt heavy. Daniel stared out toward the empty road for a moment before letting out a quiet breath. "Well," he finally said, "that man must be the biggest fool in this whole territory." Clara blinked in surprise. Daniel continued, his voice firm but kind. "Because anyone who'd leave a woman alone out here doesn't deserve her trust in the first place." For the first time in days, Clara felt something she thought had disappeared forever. A tiny spark of hope. Daniel glanced toward the dark sky and then back at her. "You got anywhere to go tonight?" Clara shook her head. Daniel picked up his lantern. "Well then," he said, offering a small, reassuring smile, "looks like you're coming with me. My ranch isn't fancy, but it's warm, and nobody there will treat you like you don't belong." Clara hesitated only a moment before standing. She didn't know it yet, but that lonely cowboy was about to change her life forever. Daniel's ranch sat several miles outside Red Creek, surrounded by wide open fields and wooden fences that stretched toward the horizon. It wasn't a grand place, but it was peaceful. A small cabin stood near the barn, smoke drifting from the chimney as the fire inside crackled warmly. When Clara stepped through the door that night, She felt something she hadn't felt since leaving home. Safety. Daniel gave her a warm blanket and a bowl of hot stew. Clara sat quietly at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around the bowl as if she were afraid it might disappear. "You can stay here as long as you need," Daniel said simply. Clara looked up at him, surprised. "You don't even know me." Daniel shrugged slightly. "I know enough." Over the following days, Clara slowly began to help around the ranch. She cooked meals, repaired torn curtains in the cabin, and sometimes watched Daniel work with the horses from the fence line. Daniel never pressured her, never asked for anything. But little by little, Clara noticed something remarkable. Daniel treated her with a kindness she had never expected. He respected her. One evening, as the sun set behind the golden hills, Clara stood beside the fence watching Daniel finish repairing a broken gate. "You didn't have to help me," she said quietly. Daniel leaned against the fence and looked at her. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I wanted to." Clara hesitated before speaking again. "The man who rejected me, he said I wasn't what he expected." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then he was blind." Clara blinked in surprise. Daniel tipped his hat slightly. "Because what I see is someone strong enough to cross half the country alone." The words warmed her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Weeks passed. The ranch slowly felt more like home. Clara laughed again. She smiled again. And one evening, while watching the stars appear above the quiet plains, Daniel spoke the words that would change everything. "Clara, you don't have to leave if you don't want to." She turned toward him. "I mean," he continued carefully, "this ranch could use someone like you. And so could I." Clara's heart raced. For the first time since arriving in Red Creek, she wasn't afraid of the future, because now she knew she wasn't facing it alone. And in that quiet moment under the endless Wild West sky, the broken bride, who once had no hope, realized something incredible. Sometimes life destroys your plans, only to guide you towards something better, something real, something meant to be. And the lonely cowboy who once found a hopeless woman sitting in the cold had just found the partner he never knew he needed. Their story had started with heartbreak and abandonment, but it ended with courage, kindness, and a love strong enough to survive the harshest frontier. And that is how one cowboy changed everything for a broken bride who once believed her life was over.